Tony Stanko, Executive Director of the National Council of Entrepreneurial Tech Transfer. It's a privilege to have you here and have this discussion about what we think is a fabulous program called Startup Day across America. It's hard to believe it's 5 years already. It's been a great program with just an intention of highlighting exactly what the entrepreneurial community does for the country. So this, I think, as most people here know, is a bipartisan, bicameral effort to raise awareness and help generate support for startup communities across the country, which is a very important topic. Last year, more than 70 members of Congress traveled to their districts and states on Startup Day to visit with entrepreneurs, incubators, accelerators, and other leaders in the innovation economy. So I think this is another opportunity to do much of the same this year. I think this year it's August 1st is Startup Day across America, and we have a great panel to discuss the topics and give you more details. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Sparks, who's one of the lead offices. So Michael.
Great, thank you, Tony, and the National Council for Entrepreneurial Tech Transfer for holding this panel. I also want to thank all the other panelists for attending this forum and participating in this pretty important discussion. I'm Michael Sparks. I'm Representative Jared Polis' press secretary. My boss represents the 2nd Congressional District of Colorado, which is the northern front range of Colorado. It includes Fort Collins, Boulder, Summit County. So if anyone's ever been out skiing, that's like Vail. It's great. The district is really fortunate to have two outstanding public universities, the University of Colorado Boulder and Colorado State University, both of which have actually implemented some form of tech transfer operations. We're also privileged to have a community really across our district that has several startups, small businesses and entrepreneurs. In many ways, our district thrives on innovation and thrives on entrepreneurship activity. Whether it's a new tech company, microbrewery, or clothing line, we are lucky to have communities across our district seek and want to implement some form of entrepreneurship. But I'm also excited to have all these other congressional offices here to discuss the importance of startups in their communities. Because what we do know, and what I hope other people discuss, is a lot of the fastest growing startup companies are no longer in Silicon Valley, Austin, or Boulder. They're really all over America. We are beginning to see rapid development of startups into high growth firms. Startups across the nation are developing in a variety of industries, from retail and healthcare to entertainment and education. They are using technology to solve problems and to create innovative products and services. I do want to talk a little bit about my boss. We all know that lawmakers come from various backgrounds. Some were lawyers, others are doctors, some served in the armed forces, and others were involved in business before running for office. In many ways, having a diverse background is critical to an effective legislator, because in Congress we deal with a wide variety of issues. Representative Jared Polis started out as an entrepreneur. He founded and sold American Information Systems Incorporated, which is an internet access and web hosting business, which allowed people to host a website online. He then sold that company. He co-founded Blue Mountain Digital, which is an e-card service during the dot-com boom. So e-cards were great, and actually it's still running now in Boulder as about 40 people running the industry. And then he started proflowers.com, which he eventually sold online. So the good thing about working with Representative Polis is he knows from firsthand experience what it takes to launch and work in the startup community. He knows the ups and downs and the challenges. One of my favorite stories that he actually shares is this one where it's his first Valentine's Day with proflowers.com, which is essentially a company that takes flowers from farmers and delivers it directly to people's doors. And it's Valentine's Day, and their order is so chaotic, their ordering system's so chaotic, that he has to actually go down there and start loading up the trucks with flowers as well. So I'm just always have this image of Jared down there loading up trucks, filling it to the brim, and then like sending them off. So he certainly knows the challenges. He also knows the benefit. He sees that, he's come from an industry in the private sector that's created hundreds of jobs. So what really this is about, and now I'm going to kind of go into the initiative here. This year we were really excited because it's our 5th annual Startup Day across America. It's grown every year, and last year we actually had over 75 bipartisan members of Congress participate. Essentially what this day is just a day to invite all members of Congress to celebrate the ingenuity and entrepreneurship taking place right in their backyards. The initiative connects elected officials with the startups in their communities they represent so that they can learn about the challenges new companies face and meet the business leaders building the future. This is, like I said, it's a bipartisan, bicameral effort, and we are really looking forward to that. It's now organized annually by members of the Congressional Caucus on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, a bipartisan group whose mission is to promote policies that help new and small businesses grow and create jobs. This year, we strongly encourage members of Congress to participate in Startup Day across America. And if university, tech transfer offices, incubators and accelerators, or any other outside groups, which will be on the second panel, we want to get involved, they can contact their elected officials and ask them to come and visit them on August 1st. More information, if you're interested on the initiative, can be found on our website, which is startupdayacrossamerica.com. With that said, I don't really want to take any more time because I know we have an outstanding group of panelists here. So I'm going to let them take it away. And I just want to thank again Tony and the National Council of Entrepreneurial Tech Office, Tech Transfer, for holding this panel. And I look forward to hearing from other panelists and answering questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. So next, we're going to have Tyler. Would you like to?
Sure. Hey, I'm Tyler Grimm. I work for Congressman Issa. We co-founded the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Caucus with Representative Polis back in 2013. As was noted, this is the 5th year. We started in the summer of 2013. And, the idea really grew out of this notion that here in Washington, we hear a lot about what small businesses and startups need in terms of regulation, in terms of tax reform. But in conjunction with Congressman Polis's office, we decided, it's important to encourage members to get out there and sort of really talk to these people and hear the different challenges that they're facing. Like Congressman Polis, my boss comes from the private sector. He built a company from the ground up. He's the holder of 37 patents. He sort of fully understands the plight of the small business and the startup and sort of all the challenges they face. So, I think Michael did a really good job of summarizing sort of why we do Startup Day, why we're encouraging members to do this. So I'll quickly just talk about what we did last year, which I think is pretty good insight into how we think it should function and what we're encouraging other members to do. So last year we found 3 companies in the district that sort of represented different areas that we're interested in. We actually had a reporter travel with the congressman and I for the day and visit all of these firms, which actually resulted in like a really nice write-up both about these companies and about our engagement on issues that they care about. So we visited, one company we visited was this Bitcoin wallet company called Airbits. And we visited them because, 3 or 4 years earlier, my boss championed the Jobs Act, which provided for crowdfunding, which this company actually took advantage of to get seed funding. So we sort of went, heard about their experience with the Jobs Act, how they built their company using this mechanism that we'd fought for years earlier. And as far as I know, they continue to grow. It was really great to go meet them and hear about Bitcoin, obviously, which is this cutting edge technology. We went to the Control Group, which is sort of an incubator in the San Diego area, focusing on a bunch of different projects. But we went there because we're really interested in H-1B reform, and the Control Group is a company that we think uses the H-1B program as it was intended, and they deal with the lottery every year. And so we had a really productive discussion about the challenges they face and how hard it is for them to get visas to bring people here that they critically need to build their business. Finally, we ended the day at a local brewery. The San Diego area is home to hundreds of small breweries. And so we ended the day there talking about excise tax reform and why that's a really important issue to the breweries. And we all had a beer, called it a day, and it was just a great, fun day, I think, both for the people we visited and for the congressman. And so that's kind of how we did it last year. We're planning something pretty similar this year, trying to tie sort of what we're dealing with here to the people that are affected by it there. I mean, it's a combination of sort of talking to these people about what we're working on, but then also listening to them, the challenges that they face. And so to that end, yeah, to the extent you've got a boss that's interested, please, reach out to our office or Congressman Polis's office. There are a lot of great resources out there to help you find companies. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Tyler. Now we will turn to Yan.
All right. My name is Yan Jung. I am a science fellow in Senator Chris Coons, Delaware. So before this, I was a technology advisor at DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency at DoD. If you're not familiar with that agency, they're the ones that laid the groundworks for the early internet called ARPANET that ended up becoming part of the internet, GPS, some advanced weapons, but also a lot of advanced technologies that we actually take advantage of as civilians. A lot of that came from kind of the thinking process of the department. So coming here, I was really wanted to take a lot of that kind of innovative thinking and also working with a lot of the defense contractors and small businesses that actually ended up creating that, because the Defense Department, unlike many in the United States, we don't manufacture. We can't just say I want to make this widget for the Defense Department and it's going to be done. It's not like Russia or China. We really need to convince Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and many small manufacturers that this is worth your while, that the Defense Department is going to buy enough of these widgets to keep you in business. So it's very interesting that we actually have to constantly think about what is the business case. And coming to the office, the senator is extremely big on manufacturing, making sure that we support manufacturers, support small business manufacturers. In fact, over 95% of manufacturers in the United States are small businesses under 500 employees. So, we really, when we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about a small shop that's trying to make it work in the United States in a time when there's a lot of competition abroad using different technologies and low-cost labor. And if we really want to be serious about getting new ways of manufacturing and new jobs into the United States, we got to think about how do we leverage technology? How do we make sure that we're leveraging advanced technologies to make sure that we are competitive with the rest of the world? And so I'm going to just lay down maybe a slice of the policies that we've championed in our office that the senator has been a big supporter of. And hopefully that we kind of draw a line of one way we think is a good way to support this ecosystem. And I think we start out with the Manufacturing USA Institute. So if you're not familiar with this, it used to be called the NNMIs, got rebranded into Manufacturing USA. And these are 14 different institutes funded by, right now, the Department of Commerce, Department of Defense, Department of Energy. And the idea is that they pick specific areas in the manufacturing ecosystem, for instance, additive manufacturing, 3D printing, or lightweight materials, and create a community around universities, around excellence centers to look at research and figure out how do we get that special nugget information to the manufacturers, and so that there's a direct line from advance and innovations coming from the lab, and there's a direct line of teaching manufacturers how to use that in your production line. And I think it's a great program that the senators have support of, and many people in the community we've spoken to are grateful that they have this. In countries like Germany, they have 64 of these institutes. We have 14. And so, the United Kingdom has, I think, 8 different institutes of similar design. So I think there's an understanding that you can't just make a factory these days and hope to be profitable. You have to be able to use technology, and one way to do it is to get academics, to get industry, and to get financing, get all these people together to do that. And I think the institutes is a great way to start. The second is actually, now that you have a lot of the institutes, how do you make sure that small businesses and manufacturers understand and know how to use these technologies? And a great program is the MEP, the Manufacturing Extension Partnerships Program. This has shown to be a great force multiplier within the Department of Commerce. It more than pays for itself. $1 invested in MEP program brings back $9 in economic activity just from increases in tax revenues. And it's a program where it works within, there's 2 in each state. It works with small businesses and just helps them figure out, it's a consulting service, it's a free consulting service, and just helps them figure out if you want to export to China, this is what you have to do. If you want to increase efficiencies in your production line, this is things that we think you should do, and here are the resources that you might not be aware of because you're too worried about your bottom line. And so it's a great service, and we have actually introduced legislation that has extended the program, and in the past, and made the cost share from 2 to 1 to 1 to 1. And we have also fought for appropriations to make sure that this program does not get cut. And I think finally, we just introduced a bill to invent and manufacture in America, which is to help manufacturers get an R&D tax credit for inventing, doing the R&D in the United States if they also manufacture in the United States. So keeping the R&D center and the manufacturing center together, because once you start moving all your manufacturing center to Asia, you might be tempted to just also move their R&D center there because that's where you're doing all the stuff anyways, right? And I think that's a bad combination. So we want to encourage companies to do the innovation and manufacturing here. I think that is a great kind of slice of what we should be doing from the top-down level, getting people together, making sure that the small companies have the resources to excel in what they want to do, and making sure that once you start becoming a large enough company where you're actually doing your own R&D, that you have the support from the government to keep on doing that in the United States. And there's plenty of other things we can be doing. I'm happy to discuss that with the rest of the panel on other avenues of policy that we should be working about. But I think what I would like to discuss today is just that when we talk about technology and innovation, it's not just software, that there's a lot of hardware that we need to be doing in the United States, and a lot of that ends up to be manufacturing and advanced manufacturing. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Jan. So we're going to go to Randy now. So Randy?
Okay. Thanks, Tony. So my name is Randy Flores. I'm currently on a Congressional Fellow assignment from Los Alamos National Laboratory. So I'm supporting Congressman Ben Ray Lujan's office, and so I've been at the labs about 18 years. Prior to that, I spent a lot of time in the auto industry. So my background is engineering and manufacturing, but the last 18 years at the lab has been pretty much all weapon work, so nuclear pit production. So, the term and the work we do doesn't bring forth thoughts of tech transfer because there's a lot of security clearance issues involved. But LANL, as a whole, as a laboratory, is a very important element of the tech transfer process for New Mexico. We have the Feynman Center. It defines itself as an innovation catalyst. So that's kind of our tech transfer element at LANL. And what they do is they define innovation as a path from scientific creativity to deployment of a solution. And what they do is they try and align LANL's technical capabilities with the needs of industry or challenges or threats to our country that can possibly be worked on through commercial entities. This next week, actually, July 20th, LANL's hosting, it's called Disrupt Tech. And I think this is the second year they've had this, but it's really it's an opportunity to introduce the latest groundbreaking technology that's being developed at LANL. And inventors, entrepreneurs, investors, regional leaders, or policymakers, and industrial partners, they all convene up in Los Alamos. And it's I have not attended myself, but I think it's a pretty it's a pretty neat effort. And last year it showed some really good results. So that's my plug for Los Alamos, but I want to talk a little bit about what I do for, our office here in Congressman Lujan's office. So first off, he's the co-chair of the Congressional Tech Transfer Caucus and the National Lab Caucus. And our office believes there's a couple main points that need to be focused on when we talk about building a startup nation. The first is innovation, although it's has national and global scale impact. It really starts, and the process is really inherently local, back in the districts. And then second is the innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It requires intellectual and financial infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and most importantly, broadband is one thing that comes up a lot in our office because New Mexico has a lot of rural communities, and a lot of the efforts that we do, and we have some policies moving forward on increasing broadband reach out to a lot of these rural communities in northern New Mexico, especially. Relative to some of the things LANL's done over the years as far as tech transfer, I mean, we've been major contributors to the Human Genome Project, a laser spectrometer used on the Mars rover, quantum encryption. Recently, it's in the last 3 years, a company that was working with a Feynman Center. I don't know if you guys have heard of Descartes Labs, but they were founded and developed. It was founded at Los Alamos by some scientists there that were working on pixel by pixel image analysis of satellite images. And now this company's been recently voted one of the top 25 companies in America to change the world, which was a pretty neat headline we ran across. New Mexico is also home to 3 major universities. There's UNM, New Mexico State University, and then there's also New Mexico Institute of Mining Technology in Socorro. But it's a beautiful state. We got a lot of natural resources to offer. We got 2 national laboratories there. But we do have a digital divide that is a big impact, and I guess it's a big impediment to a lot of the tech transfer initiatives that we'd like to see happen. Our boss always says, there's a little saying in the office, he's like, if I can have internet at 30,000 feet on an airplane, I believe every New Mexican and every person, in our state should have access to broadband. So he's got one effort moving forward is called the Broadband Infrastructure Finance Innovation Act. So it's the goal of that is to create low-interest financing opportunities for public-private partnerships, as well as state and local authorities to support broadband deployment. Another thing that we have kind of working is with Senator Kuhn's office is the creation of a not-for-profit foundation for the Department of Energy. We have 17 DOE labs, and we're trying to model after what the NIH has done with a foundation that would allow them a little more flexibility in how they spend their R&D dollars and building stronger partnerships with private industry to go ahead and develop new technologies. So that's another effort we have going on, and there's probably 2 or 3 more major initiatives that I'm even learning about myself. I've been in this role about 4 months, so I think we're going to have a very busy next couple of years on trying to push these things forward. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. So now it's Andrew.
Yeah. So pleasure to be here again. Tony, been a panelist for a couple of your different events here, but certainly this is a passion for my boss, so I appreciate the opportunity to be up here. Just to let you know kind of the district and what my boss is doing, Congressman Randy Holcren, kind of the Illinois 14th District, kind of the northwestern Chicago, not suburbs, but exurbs, often referred to as the collar counties. So, we are not a tech hub. We are not large towns. It's mainly 15 to 25,000 people in our towns where we're at. We're mostly 45 minutes to an hour and a half outside of Chicago. It's mostly small manufacturing. We don't have any Fortune 500 companies or anything like that. So it is small business and, just agricultural, good and hardworking folks. So my boss, also fiscal conservative, and he's been very clear since he's been here that, being a fiscal conservative doesn't mean that you're just opposed to spending. It means that you're for spending money where the government has a role and doing it in the most effective way possible. So that is one reason that technology transfer has been a big focus of his since he's been here. He does believe that the government has a role in research that industry is never going to take on. Having national labs in our district, we have Fermilab, which is a high-energy physics laboratory, which is about as basic science as you get. We also have Argonne National Laboratory right outside of our district, which is a multi-purpose laboratory. They have light sources that are used for industry practices from pharmaceuticals to manufacturing engines. I mean, really just about any material science that you're getting into. And we've seen that technology transfer problem. It's similar to what we have in some of the NNSA labs that Randy was speaking about earlier. Argonne National Laboratory, being a multi-purpose lab, has a pretty large tech transfer office. They also have a large R&D budget, which means that they have a lot of SBIR, STTR work as well. So this has been a program that we've looked at, and again, it's a way that we're maximizing the effect of the R&D that we're doing at the front end. How do we start spinning out technologies so that folks can have a business in our district? We've got a few people working with Fermilab that are doing accelerators, and I mean, really some high-end engineering. I mean, it's an engineering problem that they're dealing with. But anytime you're building a large experiment, similar to talking about with the NNSA labs, we need engineering teams that are working on those problems. Whenever you're building an experiment in a high-energy physics facility, that is still just an engineering problem. You have your theoretical physicist over here in one room, you have your accelerator physicist in another, and these people are builders. So we've got a lot of folks kind of working that end of the spectrum, and we want to make sure that we kind of tell that story. So that's one reason that we're real excited to be a part of Startup Day across America. My boss is probably in an incubator every other month. We're at a university probably every other month as well. But we haven't taken part in this day before, I think mainly because of logistics. But he's real excited about getting out and kind of showing the full aspect of what's being done in small businesses. Small business, another thing that my boss has been working on from the get-go is really pass-through companies. So we are looking at the tax status for, how do we get more money, I mean, really a business just to keep their money whenever they're starting to make it. We've tried to exempt from tax certain percentages of your first, maybe $1 million. This is something that's also been reflected now in the GOP kind of tax blueprint that we put out. So we're excited to see that and get some of this relief for early stage startup companies that are coming out of our district. So real excited about Startup Day and look forward to kind of talking to folks and getting questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, and all the panelists. That was a great presentation on the importance of startups and innovation in the country. I think we'll open it up for questions before we go to the next panel. So, anybody have a question? We don't have a mic. You'll have to speak up. We're trying to record this, so if you could speak up. Go ahead. Uh-huh.
My name is Marcelo Esteves, Vice President for Research Manager. My question is for Dr. Chen. What, in your opinion, is the future of NNMI Institute for the next couple of fiscal years? And secondly, what is the outlook for the young people? I have a third question.
Jan, do you mind repeating the questions before,
Sure. Okay.
before you answer?
The first question was on the Manufacturing USA Institutes and the outlook going forward. Each of the institutes, as they're started up, they have money, partially from the government and then partially from matching funds from industry. And that will continue about 4 years, and after which it is up to the institutes and the kind of community to figure out what to do next. Now, some of these institutes, they all kind of started at different times, so they're staggered. So it's not just in 1 year that all of them have to figure out what's going on. And I think the expectation is that, I think this is an experiment. I think a lot of them are trying to figure out the networks and the partnerships they'll need with industry to make sure that they have longevity past this 4-year period. And I think the ones we've been speaking with have figured out new kind of commercialization models. I just spoke with the one in Chicago, actually, the DMDII, which is the Digital Manufacturing Institute. Their job is to figure out new ways to help small businesses digitize their factory floor and how to make things more efficient. One way they're doing that is what's called a digital manufacturing commons. And so they're actually selling this I think the end of this month, which is like as a paid for service. And I think the best way to describe it is, probably not the best way, but if you think of TurboTax, something we don't like to do is taxes. But TurboTax has kind of made it a simple way where there's big buttons, right? There's not a lot of choices in terms of where you could go wrong, but it says, do you want to do this? And this is the next step. And really it helps hold your hand through this very complicated process. And for many small business manufacturers, putting an advanced sensor into your CNC machine when they were just doing everything manually can be a very daunting experience and might prohibit them from doing something that might be good for their business. And so the idea is that there will be a service where they'll have a technician come in, and also there's a web portal that says, do you want to save money on efficiency? Do you have problems with your workforce? Do you have, help identify the problem first, and then have actually a real live person come and do free consulting for the first 3 months or so on identifying that the best way to go forward using technology, and then once they see a return on investment, figure out new payment models. So I think that's one way. It's just one example of how one manufacturing institute is thinking of commercializing part of the innovation that's coming out of the labs and going forward. And I think each of these manufacturing institutes are going to have a different model and different products that they might see as commercializing. But I think it's going to be really up to the institutes themselves to figure out how the next step is going to be for them. The second question was on the MEP program and the kind of outlook for that. Our office, we are a very big supporter of the MEP program. We've made a strong case in an appropriations letter, on why it basically pays for itself. The program, unlike what some people have said, it's not corporate welfare. In fact, it actually creates more money than actually we put in. It's a $130 million program, which in the large scheme of things is nothing, and yet it creates over $1 billion in terms of economic activity. So it's also true in each state. So I think every state and every small business has really a skin in the game in making sure that, and it's a great way to just get small business connected with a broader thing, especially if you're in a state like Maine or Alaska, which we've spoken with. They find that this program is actually very helpful for them in actually tapping into an even larger network that they might not have access to. So in terms of the program, we'll wait and see, but I think there's a lot of supporters of the program, and I think the voices are fairly loud. So.
And I'll just add in the House CJS appropriations bill, it is still funded in the House markup. So.
Yeah. Right. Your last question is on the patent. This is the Stronger Patents Act. That was drafted by the legislative team, so when it gets into legal stuff, I don't want to perjure myself or make sure I just misrepresent the office. So I'm happy to direct you to our legal team that actually drafted that. Yeah, thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Any more questions? Okay, while people think of some questions, I'll ask a couple. So we have some staffers here. How do their offices sign up to participate for Startup Day across America?
You can shoot either one of us an email and let us know you're going to do it. You don't have to formally sign up. We like to keep track of members that are doing it so we can build a list and, continue the success of this. We like to hear, the reason for collecting information is we like to hear the stories that members are getting and hear how startups are being affected by things we're doing here in Washington. So it's as easy as contact us, let us know you're going to do it. If you need help identifying companies, we'll point you in some directions, and that's about it.
So they should contact Michael and you, Tyler, or are there others too?
They definitely email Michael. I'm just kidding. No, yeah, either one of us.
Either one? Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yep.
All right, any questions yet or comments? You can actually make some statements from the floor if you like in response. Oh, you're going to make me do all the work? Okay, I have another question. All right, so we have a number of universities. So on their side, what can they do to work with their congressional representatives to support the day? And why don't we just go right down the line for this one?
I mean, first of all, I'll say it's really easy for a member to go to a university if you've got an incubator and kind of just make that case. It really is something that, time is limited with every member. That's, one of the slightest resources that we do have. So if you can show them, come in here, meet with 5 businesses that are coming up in your district, I mean, that's an easy trip for members to make.
Lucky we have representatives from UD here today, and we work very closely with our university system in terms of tech transfer, and we're blessed that in our state, I think a lot of the economic and transfer innovation stuff happens at the university level at UD. So, and I think what we do, and I don't know if this is the necessarily works for everybody, but we just have a great relationship with our home office, and whenever there's a tech transfer related issue, we talk to them and see what's happening in our state. I think having that open communication channel is great. We work very closely with Joy and his tech transfer office. So, I think that starts with having good communication.
Yeah, we're right above UC San Diego, which is a major source for tech graduate students going into this world. Aside from kind of the tech transfer issues that I encourage people to focus on, also, I mean, a lot of startups start in dorm rooms. A lot of universities keep track of this, so I'd encourage you to reach out to state universities, ask them what companies were born out of their schools, and that's a good way to find places.
Yeah, just kind of reiterate what everyone else has said. If a tech transfer office is interested in participating, it means a lot, I think, when it comes from the district itself. It's one thing if it's Tyler and I sending out an email or having leadership send out an email about, participating. It's whole another thing when there's a transfer office, or if there's another group like a university accelerator or incubator who reaches out and says, hey, I'd love for you to come and visit my startup company or see my small business.
Yeah, in our district in New Mexico, basically I-40, New Mexico doesn't have a lot of interstates. There's 2 major ones, but I-40 North is our district, and so we have UNM there. We've got Los Alamos and Sandia. I'm gonna throw out the Feynman Center. As far as Los Alamos goes, that's an excellent resource. You can find them online. Our Map, which is in Albuquerque, like Zen mentioned, they really do a lot of work with UNM. I know they've had a lot of collaborations over the year, and Sandia is very closely linked to some of the tech transfer initiatives that are taking place at University of New Mexico. UNM has a branch in Los Alamos as well. So there's a lot of connective opportunities in the northern New Mexico area, and I think you can reach out to any of those entities. And
another resource, I'd just kind of like to jump back in here real quick, but we represent 7 counties, which means we have 7 county boards. Every county board has a workforce investment board. Most of them have incubators as well. So it is also another opportunity where you can meet with other elected officials, or really get out and see a number of your counties whenever you're trying to get out to your district.
Okay, excellent. All right, final call for questions before we go to the next. We do have a microphone now, so you can just hold on for 1 sec, so we don't have to have it repeated. Great, thanks so much.
I don't think it's on. Is it on?
Yes.
I'm Mike Shiola. I represent Colgate University. We're upstate New York, small liberal arts institution. We have an incubator that's been running for about 9 years, and we're having a lot of impact. So we've launched 30 or 40 companies that have resulted in multiple millions of dollars of funding. We're tracking numbers of full-time jobs that are being created, and so we're having actually a national impact. My question is about a comment, Michael or Tyler, I don't know which one of you were mentioning H-1B reform. There's a couple of things that are particularly challenging for us as a liberal arts institution that are graduating 9 non-STEM majors,
Yep.
who then are trying to, that are international students, they're trying to stay in the States. The 12-month OPT with the J-1 visa is a problem for non-STEM. For STEM, it's now up to 3 years, which is good. And then on the flip side, the H-1B, same thing. as you're looking back to what their undergraduate major, being an English major, but also having incredible tech chops doesn't really work well. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about where you guys are at and what you're thinking about.
There are ongoing discussions about sort of reforming the H-1B program right now. As you've alluded to, I mean, we think the STEM OPT program has sort of done a lot, is working successfully, and I think we hope the administration, keeps it intact and continues to support that. With respect, it seems like your question is, if you're an English major from abroad and you go to work for a tech company, given the parameters in the H-1B program, how do we keep you here? And OPT. Yeah, let me think about that, and let's talk more later. I don't have a very concrete answer for you now, but yeah, I'm happy to have that discussion. Sure. If you have anything to add. No. If anyone else wants to talk about H-1Bs. Okay.
I'll add. So we, Senator Coons, we did introduce a bill on 2013, 2015, the Immigration Innovation I-Squared bill. It's with Orrin Hatch's office. I believe they're thinking about a reintroduction soon. But the idea in that one was it would raise all caps, and as well as exempt master's and doctoral students. And so, and I think that might be helpful for those in the non-STEM fields, but also doing a graduate degree to qualify as well for exempt status. That is.
Okay, one final question. Anyone? No? Okay, let's go on to the next panel. Let's thank this panel. Thank you so much. That was fabulous.
I didn't read well. I didn't know which panel I was on.
Okay, so this is the NGO panel, basically on the same topic. So Startup Day across America again. And so we have Scott Andes from Brookings, Monica Laufer from Engine, Jason Wins from Kauffman, and myself, Tony Stanko. So Scott, do you want to go first?
Sure. Sorry, you guys had to look at me for the first panel. I got confused which panel I was on, but here we are. Great. So given this is Startup Day and the general goal is to think about how members of Congress, universities, and others in D.C. can think about the role, both the role of startups and then how we can aid and abet those startups throughout the country, I thought what I would do is walk through some of our work in different places around the country and just use specific examples of where we saw opportunities and challenges amongst the startup communities in different places to animate how every place looks a little different, and Washington should think about startups based on the particular challenges in respective regions. So the team I work on at Brookings, we focus on urban policy largely, but I would say regional policy. We work in rural areas as well a bit. So I'll walk through sort of 4 cities then and what their startups faced, and then have some policy recommendations that I think can be broadened on a national level. So first, Philadelphia. We worked in Philadelphia for about a year and a half on their innovation ecosystem, and entrepreneurship was a big part of that. Interesting place, 5 million people, major metropolitan area in the United States. Clearly on everyone's radar, particularly for healthcare. It's a global healthcare hub, so when you look at startups in the life sciences industry, extremely strong. Access to capital is fairly pronounced. Quite a number of intermediaries supporting it. But what we found was despite how large a city it was, how dense an innovation ecosystem, strong universities, outside of the life sciences around computer science and tech startups, there was a real weakness. So this for us was kind of surprising because you'd assume in a major city like the United States, everyone thinks about startups as software, but that's actually not the case. Different cities have specialized over a very long time period in particular areas of startups, leaving gaps elsewhere. So we recommended a number of things between coordination amongst major anchor institutions like Comcast, and then two, just endowing technology chairs at local universities. One thing that we've found in around the country is tech companies actually endow chairs that are interested in entrepreneurship. And so when you're a city like Philadelphia, where you see $1.4 billion in federally funded research, having your academic community really focus on entrepreneurship is important. And around the country, companies have been good at this. They've endowed chairs and philanthropies. And so that was one thing we did there. We think that can be scaled across the country in a number of ways. Moving to a very, very different city, but a city that looks like much of the country, we did a similar amount of work in Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City looks obviously drastically different from Philadelphia. Much smaller area, less access to venture capital. Like many cities in the United States and regions, the first thing I think you hear in a place like Oklahoma City, where many of you all are from, is that there's a capital constraint. And at first blush, that was certainly true. Less venture capital than you would expect, given the size of the region and whatnot. But when we got under the hood, I think what we found also reflects what really looks like much of the country, where the constraint wasn't actually on the access to capital, it was the fundable ventures, or really the institutions, particularly the universities and some of the other companies. The companies weren't incentivizing workers to start their own businesses. The tech transfer mechanisms at the universities weren't pronounced enough. So the constraint wasn't access to capital. When ideas were good, they could get pre-seed, seed, A, and even B rounds. But there wasn't enough coming out of the universities as a whole. And so we suggested that because demand and scale was an issue, to do sort of a joint tech transfer program across multiple universities so they could share best practices, aggregate supply around what people were working on, et cetera. Again, most places have more than one universities. National labs can work with their universities. There's ways of getting scale benefits from tech transfer in a way that I don't think we're doing very well. And then lastly, I have numerous others that we can talk about later, but third, I'll just talk about Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh kind of the cool Roboburg, as I think Politico called it, and in a lot of ways it is. So you've got a city that produces 260% the university research, given its size. It truly is a technology generator. The problem is in where it's really, really good in terms of size, which is actually the life sciences. The University of Pittsburgh gets over close to $1 billion in R&D, and yet you don't see the life science companies building in Pittsburgh at all. So we really looked under the hood as how do you connect in a very, very difficult industry like the life sciences, connecting your universities with startups, with global capital. So we suggested a beefed up SBIR program. So if you get the SBIR, local philanthropies will chip in and help you find markets, help you access test bedding and other types of things that we support for the national SBIR. But we're suggesting cities to just go ahead and do it on their own until Washington steps up. And so a number of other things that we also are trying to get them to build a global health accelerator. They've got multiple accelerators like many places around the country, but the thing is accelerators are only as good as they are specialized, and really focusing on attracting the management talent. It's not just access to capital, it's allowing entrepreneurs to access managerial talent. And so we're doing that with building a global health accelerator. So those are just a laundry list of a few things that we've noticed in cities that I think when we think about how to support entrepreneurs at the national level, I think it's best to identify, as we would in any other area of economic life, specific challenges that entrepreneurs face in their particular marketplaces. And with that, I guess whoever's next.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Scott. Monica, would you like to go next?
Right. So I'm Monica Laufer. I'm with Engine, which I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with it, but Engine is a research and advocacy organization. We're based out in San Francisco, but we also have a presence here in DC. And the idea behind our work is that we're really bridging the gap between policymakers and the startup community. There's such a large impact that legislation has on startups, and yet that impact is very rarely conveyed to policymakers when they're thinking about passing new laws. So we want to make sure that there's an open channel of communication, that we're figuring out how exactly these policies can impact startups, and how we can help policymakers make laws that are beneficial and not harmful. So with that being said, I kind of want to back up a little bit and just talk kind of why we're talking about startups in the first place, why we care about startups, why Startup Day is so important. And I think mostly that's because startups are really fundamental to economic growth in our current economy. In the 2016 election, we proved that there's a big economic transformation going on, and that there's a lot of dying out industries, and we need to look to the future and figure out how we can, breathe life back into Middle America. And I believe, and Engine believes, that the best way to do that is through supporting the startup community. So I just wanted to give you all a little bit of data about how startups can help impact the economy. So according to Kauffman Foundation data, last year startups are responsible for as many as 50% of new jobs. And in addition, as these companies grow, they don't just expand in size, but they often also expand in location. So they contribute to economies in various geographies. Then on top of that, types of businesses are very critical when talking about startups, just because a new coffee shop might not create an influx of new jobs, but what researchers have found is that innovation-driven enterprises do tend to have a significant economic impact. And what we mean by that is, a company that is spreading the implementation of a new technology or coming up with a new use for an existing product or service. Age of a company is also really important to job growth. Companies less than a year old have created an average of 1.5 million jobs per year over the last 3 decades. And in a 2015 National League of Cities report, local policymakers listed new business creation as the #1 source of economic improvement in their cities. So that all seems sort of self-explanatory, but I think we often forget about that when we're talking about startups. So I wanted to make sure that I set the stage on that. What Engine does is looks at policies, as I mentioned earlier. So over the last several months, Engine has looked at a number of different policies that impact startups across the country. And 2 of those that I wanted to bring up, as were mentioned before, are access to foreign talent and open internet. So on the immigration issue, some of the fastest growing companies of the last decade, including Tesla and Palantir, were founded by at least one immigrant entrepreneur. In addition, in 2012, immigrant-founded tech companies employed over 500,000 workers and generated $63 billion in sales. Last year, more than half the startups valued at over $1 billion were founded by immigrants. So across the board, that's really important to startups, that they can get access to the talent that they need that they might not be able to find here in the U.S., that we want the best and the brightest working in these engines of economic power, and sometimes those people are here and sometimes they aren't. So we want to make sure that people with that talent can get into the country. That being said, maintaining an open internet is also completely fundamental to the startup ecosystem. So Engine recently gathered the support of over 1,000 startups in all 50 states in expressing the critical impact that the internet has on their ability to operate their businesses. Access to the internet has been democratizing entrepreneurship over the last several years to an unprecedented level. So the reversal of the 2015 open internet order could threaten this by challenging the ability of companies to compete with incumbents on the internet and maintain affordable connection to potential customers. And I just wanted to make a quick pitch. The Startup Net Neutrality Day of Action is tomorrow, so if anyone's interested in participating, let me know. And then one more final thing. Engine started this initiative called Startups Everywhere, and the idea Behind that is that startups exist in every corner of the country, and we often think of them just in New York and San Francisco and Boston. But the fact of the matter is, if you support ecosystems, they can grow. So what we've been doing is we've been highlighting these ecosystems and profiling leaders and showcasing developments in rising entrepreneurial communities throughout the country. We've highlighted Hawaii, we've highlighted Alaska, we've highlighted both Portland, so Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine. We've highlighted Tallahassee, and really just showing that, really interesting things are happening everywhere. And one of the most important outcomes of this initiative is that we saw that not all ecosystems are the same. So while there are some common themes like the need for foreign talent and the need for an open internet, many ecosystems have other issues that are rising to the top, and that we often think about making policies for startups is like a one-size-fits-all, and I feel like that's really detrimental, that instead we need to be going to the startups and saying, what do you need, instead of sort of assuming and making assumptions based on what we've heard from a startup in New York and thinking that that's going to be the exact same thing that a startup in Louisiana needs. So that's sort of the point of startups everywhere. And so I just wanted to give you all a little bit of taste of what we're hearing from these different startups. In the Pacific Northwest, we heard from startups that infrastructure and transportation laws were really, really important to startups there because they can accommodate the really rapid urban growth that was happening with the rise of startup communities. Meanwhile, in Iowa, we heard that entrepreneurs wanted to maintain some sort of flexibility when it came to their health care that they had achieved through Obamacare, and allowing founders to be risk takers when it came to starting their own companies. In Tulsa, we heard from entrepreneurs that the emphasis on open data in Oklahoma has been really important, and it's led to several early-stage startups focused in the government space. And then in Hawaii, we heard that government investment in accelerator programs and investment funds were really important to launching startups in Hawaii, where a number of energy-based startups have come. So on that note, I feel like it really ties in well to Startup Day across America, because I encourage all of you to get out into your districts and hear from the startups about what really matters to them in their unique region, and how your bosses can help support them. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Monica. So Jason, you're next.
Thank you, Tony. And I also especially want to thank the congressional sponsors of Startup Day across America, Michael and Tyler, and the other offices that are helping promote this initiative. So I'm excited to be here. I come from the Kauffman Foundation. We are a private, nonpartisan philanthropy headquartered in Kansas City, Missouri, started by a very successful entrepreneur named Ewing Kauffman, who in the 1950s started a pharmaceutical company in the basement of his home that over time grew to employ over 3,000 people, reach almost $1 billion in sales. And so we're trying to make sure that that kind of uncommon experience, as Mr. Kauffman said, that he had is more common to more people today. So I wanted to use just a few minutes to talk about to the congressional staff that are here why it is important that you and your boss participate in Startup Day, and then to really encourage you to make this practice of meeting with entrepreneurs something that you do on a regular basis, and use Startup Day as a catalyst for regular engagement with the entrepreneurs and young companies in the districts and states that your boss represents. So Monica shared a little bit of data that came from the Kauffman Foundation about the importance of entrepreneurship. Nearly all of the net new jobs in the United States come from companies that are less than 5 years old. That's the good news about entrepreneurship. The bad news is that the startup rate today is about half what it was in the 1980s. There's been a long-term, decades-long decline in the rate at which Americans are starting businesses. So why is that happening? I think there are a lot of reasons, but in general, we could sum up those reasons by saying that there has been, over time, an increase in the number of barriers that have been put in the way, intentionally or not, between people who have an idea and that want to take that idea and turn it into reality. So I think one of the goals for Startup Day for your members is to go talk to the entrepreneurs, as we've heard from others on this panel, about the unique circumstances that they face, and find out what are those barriers, big or small, that are getting in their way, and then work to mitigate and remove those barriers.
At the Kauffman Foundation, we have recently identified 3 big trends that are affecting entrepreneurship. I want to share with you briefly what those 3 trends are and what are some of the barriers that are associated with those trends. So the first trend that we see is something we call the new demographics of entrepreneurship. Essentially, in the United States, our population is becoming increasingly more racially diverse. But when you look at the entrepreneurial population in the United States, it's 80% white and 65% male. So there's a gap, growing gap between what our population as a whole looks like and the population of entrepreneurs. If minorities in the United States started businesses at the same rate as non-minorities, we would have over 1 million additional new jobs, 1 million additional new businesses in the United States, and up to 9.5 million new jobs. If the gender gap in the United States was closed for entrepreneurship, we would have up to 1.7 million additional new businesses. So to the staff, I encourage you and your members to use Startup Day to talk to women entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs of color, and find out specifically what are the challenges that they face in your district and state, and begin to address those barriers that they tell you about. The second trend that we see affecting entrepreneurship in the United States is what we call the new map of entrepreneurship, and that's been alluded to during our discussion this morning as well. That's the fact that startup communities are found across the United States, not just in the largest cities or on the coast. So the challenge here, though, is that as entrepreneurship and startup activity has spread across the country, that activity is not necessarily taking place at the same pace in rural communities. Rural communities increasingly are falling behind. The percent of startups in rural communities has dropped from 20% in the 1980s to about 12% today, and that decline is sharper and greater than the decline in the overall rural population. So if you represent a rural district, or if you're in the Senate, go out to some of the smaller communities in your state during Startup Day. Talk to rural entrepreneurs about what are the barriers that they face in trying to start a business, and then work to mitigate and remove those barriers. The third and final big trend that we have identified at the foundation that's affecting entrepreneurship nationwide, we call the new nature of entrepreneurship. And essentially, this is about the fact that businesses today, new businesses, are creating fewer jobs than they used to. So to illustrate this point, we looked at 2 technology giants of their day, Kodak and Facebook. And we looked to see how many employees did these businesses employ when they reached a similar scale in revenue. So that number we looked at was $1 billion in revenue. And for Kodak, they reached $1 billion in revenue in 1962, and at the time they employed 75,000 people. Facebook reached a similar scale in revenue. In 2013, they employed 6,300 people. So we know that new businesses are the source of new job creation in the United States, but they're creating fewer jobs today than they used to, which means we need even more people to be entrepreneurs, to start new businesses, to create the jobs that our economy needs, so that people have opportunities to provide for themselves and for their families. So regardless of who you talk to on Startup Day, talk to them about what are the barriers that they're facing. How can we reduce those barriers so that people who have an idea, regardless of who they are or where they're from, can take that idea and turn it into a reality in the form of a business. That's what we're fighting for at the Kauffman Foundation. But we need your help to find out what are those barriers and to help entrepreneurs in your districts and states to be able to realize their dreams.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Jason. So, Tony Stanko again. So, NCET2, you may or may not know of NCET2, the National Council of Entrepreneurial Tech Transfer. We actually started about 14 years ago at George Washington University, so we've been around for a while. It's been quite a ride, as they say. So, what are we? We're an association of university startup officers, investors, Fortune 500 companies, startup development officers, and mentors to really create and develop university startups. So we've heard about the importance of startups. to jobs, net new jobs come from companies less than 5 years old. You know, that's a really important fact. The economy is really still not come to grips with that. So we have a lack of jobs, as Jason has mentioned. We need more entrepreneurs. We need more startups. And we need more jobs. Well, who actually needs new jobs? Students, right? They're the ones that really have to get into the economy. So the intersection of startups and universities is really important to us. And we think there's a need there, but also there's an opportunity, because very few places in the economy can function like a university to create these new jobs. Not only new jobs like service jobs, but real high value jobs based on the science. Universities, they receive about $40 billion of federally funded research money to do research. And so there's a lot of research in those labs across the country. And when you add in the federal lab technologies that run about $100 billion a year, that's a lot of money that the country invests in this new science. And really, there's a huge opportunity to get that into the economy. And when you think about that, it takes about 20 years on average to get technologies out of the labs. You can see how big the opportunity really is for this country. So it's basically 130 plus billion over 20 years. There's trillions of dollars that can be commercialized to create these jobs. And that's the mission. That's what we try to do. We try to help do that. Universities, to some degree, are doing a fairly good job, given the amount of support they're getting, which unfortunately is not enough. Since Bayh-Dole passed, universities have created already 10,000 startups. An interesting fact here is that most of these startups stay around the university. They don't leave and go to the coastal states to flourish. In most cases, as Monica mentioned, great startups are everywhere, and our corporate members totally emphasize that. They see startups that are great around universities everywhere. Entrepreneurs are pretty evenly distributed across the country. Congress makes sure that the R&D expenditures are pretty well distributed around the country. So what accounts for the differences? Well, our view and the corporate view, our members and some of the investors, it's the infrastructure. There just isn't enough infrastructure to support the startups in most places. So Silicon Valley, New York, Boston, it's not the startups that make them, it's the infrastructure support systems in a lot of cases. And because they have such great infrastructure, what happens is they're magnets to pull them from other places. So if you really want to help the economy, and especially your state and your district, we implore you to really invest and think about your infrastructure around basically your district and state, but in particular the university. Because as Scott mentioned, universities have innovation districts. Brookings did a fabulous report on this, and I ask you to take a look at it. I think it's one of the best pieces of work I've seen in this area in a long, long time. Innovation districts are really important. These are usually clustered around universities. Why? Why? Because they have the students that circulate out after a few years. If you can keep them, that's your new, cord seed. They have alums. Alums can be in all forms and characters. A lot of them are angels, VCs, angel investors, VCs, venture capitalists. They could be Fortune 500 companies, employees. There's just a huge group of networking opportunities that universities can bring together in these innovation districts. And some of the best, they are starting. They're not very old for the most part. And you can see that there's a lot that can happen, and there's a lot of potential there. Just to show you how universities are trying, so I said 10,000 startups got created since Bayh-Dole. In 2015, 1,000 startups got created. So that's almost a 5X just in the last, since 1994. So, which was about 200 startups. So that's a 5X increase. I think every year universities are creating about 20 to 30% more startups. And what are some of these startups? A lot of them are tech-based because that's what, the infrastructure supports, but they definitely can be science-based with a little bit of help. So you had Google, you had Cisco, Genentech, Dell, Facebook, Yahoo, just to name a few. I mean, these are iconic companies that maybe not employing enough, given, what corporations have done in the past, but, the more the better. The SBIR program is one of the main funding sources. That's a great program. It has its downside for universities because it comes out of the research budget, and so it's kind of taking from one pocket to put into another. It would be nice to have separate funding for some of these important infrastructure programs that really are the future. One of the things that we're focused in on that we're starting to see are what we call faculty entrepreneurs. And so these are professors that actually graduate their students not only into the economy, but actually into a startup. And these startups are based on technologies that were built or created in the lab. And so these students kind of graduate, some of them that are entrepreneurial enough graduated to these startups, and then they create, this pull and this private-public combination with the university and with the lab in particular. That's an interesting trend to watch. I could give you some examples. Langer at MIT, he spun out over 20 startups from his lab with graduating students and postdocs. Yu Zhang from Carnegie Mellon spun out 10. And these are all, over different vintages, different students. Some of these students that graduate as regular doctoral students and go teach at other universities have actually done the same thing at their university. So if you have an entrepreneurial faculty member, that seems to be a great way to move this forward. So I think I'm going to end there, and we'll start lunch right after the questions. So why don't we take a few minutes here for questions, and then we'll adjourn for lunch. I think there's a mic, so just wait for the mic.
I'm Steve Hewison from George Washington University. I have a question for Jason. Your comment about the changing demographics of entrepreneurship and that the new startups, which tend to be software-based, don't create as many jobs for a given amount of revenue. Do you find that there's also an issue that we're not graduating enough students to fill those software jobs? And do you have any thoughts on how we can adjust our educational system to move that forward?
Thank you for the question. It's a good one. I don't have data to answer your question. My sense is from talking with entrepreneurs who often say that finding the talented workers they need for their companies, that is a challenge or a barrier that they face, leads me to believe that we have room as a country to grow in terms of making sure that we are equipping young people with the skills that they need to fill those jobs, whether they be in technology or not. Other panelists have talked about the issue of immigration. Many of our universities have their STEM programs highly populated by foreign students, yet as a country we don't have a good way to retain those students here in the United States, and I think that's to the detriment not only of entrepreneurs today, but many of those students may be entrepreneurs in the future, and so we're losing out now in terms of employment, and also I think in terms of new businesses that are not going to be started in the United States because we were not able to retain those talented individuals here.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that as well. I think one of the other things that Engine has seen in its research, and I'm sure Kauffman has seen this as well, is that a lot of these companies are very underrepresented when it comes to diverse groups. So if educational systems can amp up their ability to recruit women and minorities into their STEM programs, I think that would be a really great way to see more people enter the workforce with the capabilities that these companies need.
Luis Cifuentes from A&M Corpus Christi. We're a Hispanic serving institution, and we're part of the A&M system. So the flagship is A&M in College Station, and I was at College Station for 22 years, and then I moved down to Corpus Christi. So two very different ecosystems, two very different ways of looking at the issue of how to increase underrepresented minority involvement. The issue you have is that at a place like A&M College Station, there's the problem of how to get more students, more women and students of color into their engineering programs and the kind of programs that create this kind of technology transfer. The problem at institutions like A&M Corpus Christi is that you don't have the infrastructure to make it happen. But they're the institutions that are carrying the biggest load when it comes particularly to students of color. So I think one of the things that has to be addressed is how do you find a way to create better infrastructure at these smaller regional universities? Because if you don't do that, if you wait to try to increase the number of students getting into the R1s, the numbers aren't there. It's just not going to happen quickly enough.
I don't know too much about what's happening on the university level, but I can say more on the private side, there's a number of accelerator programs that have really worked to solve that challenge. So there's one on the south side of Chicago called Blue 1647, and they've expanded to a number of cities that have these populations of color and giving them the opportunities to learn coding skills and learn engineering skills that make them viable for those jobs. So I think that while I can't tell you what universities can do, I can definitely say if you look towards these private accelerator programs that are already trying to solve that problem, you might see the solution there. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to introduce you to the founder, if that's helpful.
Yeah, you might. I refer you again to the Brookings study in the innovation districts, because and you know, Scott, I don't want to steal your thunder here, but I hope you will pick up on this and take it from here. I think part of the issue is, you know, there is a lack of leadership nationally, but on a city side basis, I think, you know, people are standing up and setting up this infrastructure. So I think you just work with your city civic leaders, maybe your state people, your alums. Alums are great. You know, it doesn't really take a lot. It's actually less about money and more about just understanding the culture. There's a risk-taking culture that is really hard to appreciate in entrepreneurship, that you just have to be exposed to it, and you have to support it, and you just have to let it, you know, drive it. But definitely money helps. You know, these startups do need money. And I think that's, Scott, maybe you can pick that up, you know, in how states and cities and other groups are picking that.
So one thing that I think is missed in a lot of these regional ecosystems that are trying to build an entrepreneurship culture around their universities is the only universities that are taken into considerations are the R1s or the top tier. You go to any city in the country and you've got one university that's seen as like the best, right? And it's usually the one with the best rankings and research dollars. But I think this really, your point made me think of this, is a missed opportunity, because if you look at the ability to access regional employers from a mentorship perspective, the ability to solve sort of near-term problems that a company may have that a student entrepreneur may be able to do. Some of those non-tier one institutions may be better positioned to do so. One, because their alumni are local. So in cities or a lot of the cities we work in, if you go to the second-ranked business school in the country, their alumni networks and where the universities are raising their money is by definition global, right? And so the connections are global, which is great. But if you want to help that community, then going to a university where the alumni are local actually has a lot of benefit. And it aligns the incentives between both the universities from a funding perspective, but then also local communities. So I think those are kind of gems that are really underutilized around the country.
Anybody want to say anything else? I want to kind of just emphasize something. that sometimes is missed. Again, it's not about the money, it's about the vision and the leadership. Because if you look back at the history of the university, you know, Hopkins, for example, was one of I think the first major research institution in the United States. And when it started, it was looked down upon, right? It was too technical. I mean, back then it was a liberal education was the mission of the university. And so everybody was against anything that smacked of any, you know, dirty research. Fast forward, 60, 70 years, and now everybody wants to be a research university. So I think if you kind of extrapolate from that, Stanford, the same idea. I mean, Stanford actually, you might say, is the third, you know, cycle of this. Stanford was not Stanford when it started. Again, it was a second, third-tier university, you know, relative to Harvard and Yale and, you know, the major research institutions that, you know, that were around back then. And now you fast forward to where we are, and it's, you know, this has this great reputation. So if you look forward and you have that entrepreneurial mindset or that leadership mindset, you might see that you don't have to have everything in your pocket. It's having the ideas and the leaders to, you know, play to, as Wayne Gretzky used to say, be where the puck is going to go to, not where the puck is. And, you know, I think the puck is going to be where universities are major drivers of startups. And the more you invest in that area and the better you support your leaders, I think you'll get there. Regardless of where you start from, you will just get there because it's a growth path, right? This is going to be heresy, I think, to a lot of people. I don't see the research budget increasing the way it used to be, right? I don't see the tuition increasing the way it used to be, but I do see commercialization dollars, once they kick in, increasing like, you know, these other things used to grow. And I think whoever latches onto that is going to play to the future.
Yeah. Hi, my name is George Redden with Senator Moran's office. My question is directed more to Ms. Laufer, but everyone, if they have an opinion on this. You mentioned the open internet. One thing that my office believes is we also need stability. So I'm interested on your opinion on a legislative solution for open internet and what specifically that might look like.
I think the best way to keep stability would be to stick with what we've got. I mean, if you want to talk about stability, why are we rolling anything back right now? We've got a stable solution at the moment. But that being said, we understand that it's not a solution that's palatable to a lot of people. I think there's two paths to go down with this. And on one hand, we don't believe that a legislative solution is going to offer startups the freedom they need on the internet. It's going to roll this back to an extent, and it's going to limit their ability to innovate. That being said, absolutely, we definitely think some continuity is really, really important. And I think a legislative solution could certainly offer that. So it's sort of the question that we're forced to look at is are we better off making concessions and losing some of the innovative ability that the open internet has offered, or in order to get some stability, or are we going to be risk takers and can't kind of fight this to the death and try and maintain as much openness and as much innovative capacity as we have with the current regulations. That being said, I think one of the best things to do would not be to roll back these open internet regulations until a legislative fix is on the table, because you're rolling it back, then you've got some uncertainty, then you throw another piece of legislation on the table. Like, talk about uncertainty. That is the picture of uncertainty. And so as you think about a legislative solution, I highly, highly encourage you to think about maintaining the structure that we have now until there's a more widely agreed upon structure.
Hello, Joy Goswami, University of Delaware. Thanks for this wonderful panel. I think it was very stimulating and good things to hear. I come from University of Delaware, which is kind of a large university in a small state. So we have the luxury of knowing across our border as to how many startups are happening and how many good things are happening here within the state. But one thing that I wanted to mention, and this is because of the fact that I've been in the tech transfer world for, I don't know, forever almost now, that the landscape of technology transfer is changing in a big way. And a couple of things I wanted to highlight here is, and this is just a general comment, of course, highlight is that, just like Tony pointed out, when Baidu was instilled in 1980, it was a general belief that tech transfer was a profit center for the university, that they would cut out licenses and make money out of it. Of course, things changed, the landscape changed in a big way, and then there was the emphasis, of course, in the Baidu where tech transfer offices would have to support startups. So as the evolution of tech transfer is happening, a couple of things the University of Delaware has seen, and which is, I think, a phenomenal change that we have ourselves encountered, along with good leadership, is that we have kept ourselves away from being profit centers. And we have become extremely, extremely amenable to startups and faculties who wanted to start businesses around their technologies. We have appreciated that more than what we had done in the past. And so what we have done is we are almost starting to give up a lot of resources of our own and take risks in technologies that are being developed from the university. So if I ask Jason as one of the major reasons why startups don't happen, you would probably, among the many others, you'd probably think that it is the fact that tech transfer offices in the universities are sort of the bottleneck in providing access to technologies, which we have tried to keep low. And so in the course of doing that, we have realized that once we let the faculty members play around with their technologies, they do a good job. And the other thing that we have started to develop and realize is that universities and within the state, there's a lot of infrastructure that exists which the startups don't quite know. And so we have started to communicate better, and we've had some of our members from the office here talk about the fact that communication is a key. We are trying to break that silo where university tech transfer offices works differently from how the entrepreneurial center in the university works versus what the research office does versus the corporate relations does. And so what we are trying to do is to take hold of these startup entities, the entrepreneurs, and hold their hand all the way through until they are successful and they can stand on their own feet. We don't confine our functionality to just cutting licenses. That's sort of the bottom line. And so in doing so, we have done quite a good job in the last couple of years. Again, I do compliment Tony for working with our office also and assisting us with many of our endeavors and making our voice come across on platforms like these. And I definitely encourage more of these kind of social interactions to happen. And again, appreciate inviting us over and having this fantastic panel. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we probably have time for one more question if there's one, otherwise we can wrap up. Okay.
So, Jason, you made that interesting observation about Kodak versus Facebook, and I think your bottom line was, so that means we need to start up a lot more companies. But what occurred to me is that maybe, it's hard to imagine replicating, 10 Facebooks to get to 75,000 jobs. So is your research or an observations, of other kinds of models emerging, other kinds of startups that aren't the traditional, you invent something, you start a company, you get money, and because it just seems to me we're not going to be able to replicate at a scale of 10x, what Facebook did.
Thank you for that observation and question. I think you're probably right, especially with some of the nature of these platform technology companies that are being developed. The nature of them, to be successful, you only can have one or two of them, right? We can't have, I don't think the market supports dozens of search engine companies just by the nature of what the companies are doing. At the foundation, we take a real big tent approach to entrepreneurship and startups and think of them not just as those that are technology companies or technology enabled, but any new business. And I guess the point that I just want to reiterate is not so much that we need to have 10 more companies like Facebook to create the jobs that a Kodak would have created 40 or 50 years ago, but that we just need to enable more people, regardless of what their interests are, if they want to start a business, to be able to do so. And I think even if those companies are sole proprietorships and employ one person, if that's providing that person with income, financial means, and satisfaction pursuing something that they care about, that's a good thing, and we should support that. We also need to, of course, support those companies that have the potential to grow and to create hundreds or thousands of jobs, because that's where we get the big bang for our buck economically.
Anybody else on that? I'll say, anybody? Okay, I'll say something. So, you know, I think the endless frontier of science will employ everybody we need to have employed, is my opinion. It's just changing the economy so that things that are a little bit harder than doing some software apps get supported by, you know, infrastructure and some money. I don't think there'll ever be an end to the wants of mankind and womankind. There's just endless frontier. And so I think it's just a lack of vision and a lack of leadership at this point as we go from, you know, basically an industrial economy to the new economy. And I think the manifestation of the change has gone to the software because it's so easy. It's so easy to fund. You could literally be a 14-year-old, as Bill Gates was, and create a multi-billion-dollar company. But you know, this is bigger than that. This is all about the science. Again, this, you know, basically the intellectual activity between the ears getting, you know, implemented into the economy. That hasn't happened before in a non-encumbered basis, instantiated basis. You used to put all this intellectual activity that has been the value creation actually used to be in the product. So that's why it was a product-based economy. We've basically unbundled that. So now the physical part is the easy part. You can, if you want to have something built, go to China. They'll build whatever you want. In fact, we have some Chinese connections that are just saying, "Give us anything, we'll build it," right? Because they have so many factories there that have over capacity at this point. The problem is getting the stuff that people want to buy, getting the science out from the labs into these products is where the value creation could be. And if you just think about it, I mean, everybody's getting older in this country and a lot of European Western countries. Just give them their health solutions. They'll pay for that and employ as many people as you want to live, you know, longer and solve all the diseases that really afflict mankind. All right, so on that bright note, that happy note, well, we end here and have our lunch. I'd like to thank the panelists. That was fabulous. Thank you so much. All right, we have a little bit. We have room till 1:30.